Honourable Paul Goldsmith.
Well, that was a very interesting contribution from New Zealand First, talking about the rural economy from a party, the New Zealand First Party, that has consistently over the last 2 decades refused to have any support for reform of the Resource Management Act, which is an important part of the economy. You've always opposed any reforms, never voted for reforms, and so I don't have any time for their views on helping get the New Zealand economy ahead. Mr. Speaker, this is an exciting time for the New Zealand economy and for New Zealanders as a whole. This is an exciting time where, if you look back over New Zealand history, we keep being told about the time when back in 1951 New Zealand was one of the third wealthiest country in the world, and it's all gone downhill since then. And that was one of the times, of course, it was a very unusual moment when most of the developed world was still sort of recovering from the Second World War. So it was the most unusual moment that you could possibly pick out. But the main point of our prosperity in the 50s and 60s was the fact we had an open door to the UK market, and the UK was one of the wealthiest countries in the world. And that was taken away from us in the 1970s when the UK joined the EEC. And since then, New Zealand has been wandering in the wilderness in a tough world, in a world where nobody has to take our produce, nobody has to be kind to us or not put up tariffs and make life difficult for our exporters. We've struggled in that difficult environment for 30 or 40 years, and New Zealand's living standards have fallen. And we've slowly, over the years, been piecing together a way to get back into global markets, and we made great success in the 1980s with CER in Australia, and we ground our way through the WTO processes over a long time, and great progress was made with the free trade agreement with China, which has greatly boosted our living standards and has carried us through the global financial crisis and the recession so much better than we would have been otherwise. And I do congratulate the Labor Party for their foresight and their contribution in that way. And that's why I grieve, Mr. Speaker, I grieve that their commitment to open economies and free trade seems to have watered. And so for now, we've had the great success over the last few weeks of the signing the agreement around TPP, which would give New Zealanders access to the largest economy in the world and 40% of global economy. And what a marvellous opportunity that will be for New Zealand. We will be well and truly back in the game internationally with access to China, access to the largest economy in the world through the TPP, and now on top of that, we've got Mr. Grosser doing his excellent work in the EU, and we have prospects of getting into that very difficult market. So I have great optimism looking ahead for the next couple of decades that New Zealanders have the opportunity to do so well, and I back New Zealand businesses to do well in that open context. In my area, just today or yesterday, we announced some work in the geographical indications side of the wine industry, and that's just a small way to the New Zealand wine industry. The New Zealand Wine Report actually shows that New Zealand wines actually have the second highest average value after the French wines internationally, and that all ultimately comes down to the strength of the stories that lie behind our wine industry and our places, the Marlborough, Sauvignon Blanc, and Martinborough, and all those places, the Gimlet Gravels, and places that I'm sure members will know quite a lot about. And this piece of legislation will help buttress and strengthen that brand and that story behind the New Zealand wines, and will enable our winemakers to defend that in the New Zealand market, but also once you have a geographical indicator signed off in New Zealand, then that makes it a lot easier to get that recognised internationally. The other thing I wanted to mention was that New Zealand came second in the world for the World Bank Ease of Doing Business out of 189 countries, continuing to do well, first in starting a business, first in protecting minority visitors, and we continue in so many ways trying to make it easier for New Zealand businesses to do well. The Patents Bill, which I just introduced yesterday, brings a single Trans-Tasman patent regime, just another way to stop having to duplicate your patent applications. But the most important thing that a government can do is provide that strong, stable environment, fiscally sustainable, such as having a budget which is back in surplus. And when you have that sustainability, then that leads to confidence, and when you have confidence in the economy, that leads to investment, and it's only investment, Mr. Speaker, that leads to growth and jobs, and that's how we raise our living standards in New Zealand. I'm very interested to see who invited Jeremy Corbyn to be the guest speaker at the Labour Party conference this weekend. I think it was Mr. Little. I mean, why shouldn't it be time for a genuine Marxist
The
to
member's
take control?
time has expired.